Coming up on a brand new episode of Wonder Room, we've reached the final stage of the regular season and sit at the doorstep of the playoffs. Corway and Anistar face off on Primetime in a must-win for both Ruby League wildcard contenders, while Humalao and Sky Pillar go head-to-head to see who's in better shape heading into the postseason. Anistar looks as far as an intra-league matchup with Humalao to try to desperately make the playoffs, while Littleroot and Goldenrod show down for what might be the single most important matchup of the entire season. No more beating around the bush, it's finally time to see which 10 teams will be represented in the Season 8 playoffs. Put on your hats and check those stats. Week 6 review of Wonder Room starts now. Hello everyone and welcome back to Wonder Room. I'm your host, King Vasser. Coming up on today's episode, we cover the final week of the regular season. Yes, the main portion of the season is finally down, and now we get to the big dance, the playoffs just around the corner. And we're going to get into who exactly made it into the final stage of the season. But of course, we've got a lot to cover, and that includes our set recaps for week 6. It was an extremely fascinating week 6. There were, of course, the few factions that couldn't really play all their matches, but for the most part, we knew that this was going to be maybe the greatest week 6 ever by sheer fact that all 16 teams had either clinched a playoff spot already or were still in playoff contention, and that means the tensions have never been higher. Corway and Anistar kicks us off. Two teams right in the middle of that heated Ruby League wildcard race, and out the gate it would be Anistar taking advantage. Yuxi already well chipped by a fortress, gets taken down by a head smash. Garchomp comes in for the revenge KO, so Anistar makes the swap to Primarina on the SD, and then reveals that it's actually Scarf Prim, so Anistar gets off a huge early advantage with the trickery. Turn 13, Fortress Volt switches out on the Metagross to bring in Thunderous Therian, who thinks it has a KO with the Thunderbolt, but that's an AV Metagross that picked up the KO with the Psychic Fangs. No matter, Primarina, more than bulky enough to take a Bullet Punch, takes out the Metagross with the Ice Beam. Cinderace has to come out, goes for the U-turn, reading the switch into Fortress to bring out Mandibuzz, who is able to pick up the KO with the Foul Play to tie this one up. But later on turn 21, Lucario comes in on Mandibuzz trying to roost. And then Corway, fearing that Lucario is going to set up, goes for the Whirlwind as Lucario Terra Normals and then goes straight up for the Drain Punch. So while Mandibuzz is able to get Lucario out of there and block the Future Sight, it's not going to be able to take that Moonblast from the Primarina. So Cinderace is going to have to come in. It's going to take a lot of chip from that Moonblast before picking up the KO with the Gunk Shot as coverage. But now that the Cinderace is locked in and paralyzed, that means that Arcanine H can come in, pick up these KOs with the Flare Blitz. Breloom retaliates with a Mach Punch, but it's going to be choice locked here, so Slowking G is going to be able to pick up the KO Future Sight just for a little bit of insurance, BM, whichever you want to call it. Anistar, regardless, gets the Game 1 victory. On to Game 2, Yuxi providing a lot of problems for Anistar from the outset, gets a big knock on Thunderous Therian on turn 11. But as Garchomp tries to come in, Weather Ball revealed as the coverage, so Corway bamboozled here just a little bit. Cinderace U-turns out on the Thunderous, which stays in, gets good chip on Metagross with the T-Bolt, and then is able to knock off the AV before Metagross picks up the KO with the knockoff in return. So once again, Anistar looks to have a slight lead early. Yuxi goes down to a Terra Normal Lucario E-Speed on turn 15 to give Anistar the lead right back. Cinderace comes in and takes a lot of chip from that E-Speed before picking up the KO with the Powerball in return. Turn 19, Mandibuzz roosts up. Slowking G goes for the Thunder Wave, so he gets off that para, lives the Foul Play from the Mandibuzz to be able to Chilly Reception out right into Arcanine H. Rocks her up to Arcanine, down to 31%, but it's able to pick up the KO with the Head Smash on the Mandibuzz. That's going to bring in Metagross. But despite the fact that Anistar is up in Mons, their HPs are not looking too great. A bullet punch into a knockoff combination from Metagross takes out the Slowking. Primarina comes in already severely chipped. It goes down to a bullet punch after rocks. Arcanine H comes in, and while it does have E-Speed, it's not going to be enough to pick up the KO on Metagross. Takes care of the Arcanine H with another bullet punch, and then Fortress, already slower and also severely chipped, goes down to an EQ, so Koroway ties this one up. Game 3, Uxie once again providing problems, and then Garchomp comes in to block the Volt Switch, pick up the KO on Fortress with the EQ, so Koroway out to an early lead this time. Metagross comes in, Shadow Ball only doing 37%, and then a great knockoff comes out from Metagross on the incoming Slowking G, and then the Psychic Fangs takes care of it from there. Arcanine H is going to come in to retaliate, but the double into Primarina is read by Koroway. Metagross gets off some good chip on Primarina, and then even better chip on Lucario with Psychic Fangs. Uxie comes in to finally relieve Metagross, blocks that Drain Punch, not necessarily, but all that chip is going to hurt Lucario in the long run, and then a few more turns later, U-turns out on the incoming Arcanine H to allow Garchomp to get in, easily take the head smash, and then gets off a scale shot to outspeed anything else that would come in afterwards. And from there on out, it's looking like a Koroway sweep in Game 3. Primarina goes down to the Poison Jab coverage, and Anastar calls it quits. And so Koroway picks up the huge victory on versus Seeker. Metagross and Garchomp combining for 12 KOs. Koroway moves to 9-10, right at the doorstep of a playoff berth, while Anastar's back half of the season struggles continue, dropping to 6-13. Two NWBA old heads, two of the most storied GMs in league history, Humlau and Sky Pillar, going head to head on versus Seeker. And you know, in a matchup like Rain versus Balance, there's going to be a lot of jockeying for positioning here. Early on, Barraskewda gets out a strong flip turn out on Iron Hands, which is able to take down Vileplume thanks to a combination of Drain Punch and Heavy Slam. So Humlau gonna have to reset the Rain here with Pelipper, and then go into an Hatterene, which was already heavily chipped by Iron Hands, goes down to a Thunder Punch to bring Barraskewda back in. And Sky Pillar does have a lot of recourse for this Rain team. Physically defensive Manaphy not taking too much here from a liquidation, while the second one is going to hurt a lot harder thanks to the defense drop. Manaphy does have rest to cure its sleep in the rain thanks to hydration. So we move to turn 14. Humlau is going to have to find another angle of attack. Barraskewda flip turns out knowing Manaphy is going to come in, goes into Jolteon, Terra Fairies, and starts the party with a Calm Mind. And then crucial mistake here from Sky Pillar. Como is bulletproof and not soundproof, so an Alluring Voice is going to one-shot that thing, force Electros to come in, and a Jolteon at +1, and Terra's doing a lot of damage, even to an AV Eel with that Alluring Voice. So Iron Hands is going to have to come in. It has Fake Out, which is going to do a good bit of damage to this Jolteon, but Jolteon faster than everything else on the field. And so it's going to be a matter of Sky Pillar trying to sack things to get Iron Hands in to force this Jolteon out. And it's going to wear down Sky Pillar's units, Azelf, and then Decidueye going down to the Jolteon. Iron Hands comes in at 31% after all that Rocks chip. Jolteon finally leaves. And while Iron Hands is going to be able to pick up the KO on Pelipper with that Thunder Punch, Barraskewda and Jolteon are both still alive. And so Barraskewda comes in, flip turns out on the Manaphy, and it doesn't really matter which of the two offensive threats cleans up this game. This game one is functionally over. Jolteon picking up the KO with Thunderbolt. Iron Hands comes in. He will graciously give Sky Pillar one last KO thanks to Iron Hands before Barraskewda cleans up with another liquidation to take game one. Game 2, turn 7. Electros in on Pelipper. Hatterene comes in on a discharge. Eject buttons out into Jolteon. Terra's up and starts Calm Minding to go for another sweep. Electros knocks off the boots. Alluring Voice does a good chunk of damage to Electros, which does have Stomping Tantrum and crucially gets a critical hit. So Jolteon picks up the KO with the Alluring Voice, but now it's in Fake Out KO range. So Chansey's going to have to come in, and this thing was already knocked off by Electros, so it's not going to be able to live a Drain Punch from Iron Hands, who gets right back up to full. Jolteon comes in. Alluring Voice does a nice 39%, but the Iron Hands more than able to live that one. Pick up the KO with a Drain Punch, so Sky Pillar once again in the lead. Pelipper comes in, stays in, and gets T-Punch for its troubles. So now Toxicroak in as a swap for Vileplume comes in. Decidueye ready to hit this thing hard with a Hurricane, and has a Cobra Berry just to make sure the +2 Sucker Punch isn't doing that much. Toxicroak taking a lot of damage from that Hurricane, not enough to KO, and it breaks through the confusion to pick up the KO on Decidueye with a knockoff, but this thing is still relatively low. Azov able to come in, has Terra in the back just in case, takes care of Toxicroak with that Psyshock. So Hatterene's gonna have to come in, and Azov has Thunder as a coverage move, knowing that they were gonna face the rain, gets the full peril on Hatterene, takes it down with another Thunder, and Barraskewda, which was already heavily chipped by an Azov read earlier in the set, goes down to a Manaphy Rocky Helmet chip for Sky Pillar to even up the set. Game 3, again, you know these two are going to be jockeying for position heavy, so we got to go all the way to turn 14 before some actually happens. Azov already parried by a Chansey Thunder Wave, tries to get a read with the Thunder, instead takes a lot of Seismic Toss chip, gets full parried on the next turn, so takes even more Toss chip. So Azov goes straight for the Psyshock to take whatever chip it can get before going down to a third Seismic Toss. Then all the way on turn 25, Jolteon comes in, tries to go for a straight T-Bolt, but Spadef Sylveon easily lives that, the swap for Como. And then Terra Fairy Hyper Voices on the Chansey to pick up the KO, tie this thing up at 5 apiece. Barraskewda comes in, Sylveon tries to stall a little bit with the Protect, but you know Liquidation is going to be doing a lot of damage. Manaphy already heavily chipped. Barraskewda content to take a few turns of Rocky Helmet chip to take out the Manaphy. So Sky Pillar's best recourse to Barraskewda goes down. Vileplume comes in on the ensuing Iron Hands Heavy Slam. And then Iron Hands tries to go for the KO, but Pelipper comes in to take the Heavy Slam. And then the double back into Vileplume to take the Thunder Punch, so Vileplume doesn't go down, and Iron Hands takes all that Rocky Helmet chip. Knowing that the Vileplume is faster, Iron Hands switches out into the Decidueye, which has just low enough attack that the Hurricane is going to pick up the KO on Vileplume, but now that means that Barraskewda gets to come right back in, claim another victim with that Liquidation. Decidueye goes down, Iron Hands comes in, Hatterene comes in on the fake out, and then Iron Hands doesn't go for the Heavy Slam, doesn't think it'll KO, but that allows Hatterene to get off a Healing Wish, and so Barraskewda gets right back up to full, and knowing that Manaphy is down, there's just not enough on the table for Sky Pillar to weather the storm. Skewda leaves just to get the rain back up to completely ensure that Barraskewda is going to be able to pick up the ensuing KOs, and Iron Hands tries to go for some reads, not gonna matter. Pelipper U-turns out into Barraskewda, picks up the KO on Iron Hands with a Liquidation, so it's down to just a Spadef Sylveon. No way in hell that lives a Liquidation in the rain. And so Humilau positions themselves well, picks up the 2-1 victory on Versus Seeker. Barraskewda and Jolteon both putting up 6 KOs. Iron Hands a great performance on the other side, but it's Humilau that gets the big victory on Versus Seeker to clinch a top 3 seed in the Sapphire League. Humilau would turn right back around and jump right into action, this time against Anastar, more desperate than ever to find a win and keep pace in the Ruby League wildcard race. Early on, Hatterene takes a head smash, able to get Barraskewda in, which flip turns out. You see how much damage even a flip turn is doing to Fortress of all mons. Conkeldurr comes in, gets off a Drain Punch, and while it does end up getting T-Wave, Fortress content to trade its own life for a rapid spin to give Humilau the early lead. Then on turn 14, Chansey gets off a Seismic Toss on a Slowking G, knowing that it's just going to Chilly Reception out. Allows Arcanine H to come right back in. And so Humilau is going to have to think about sacking something. So Pelipper comes in, goes down just to set up the rain. And it's time for Barraskewda to eat. Primarina is going to be able to come in. It is a resist, but it's not bulky enough to take a liquidation. 53%, meaning that Barraskewda easily picks up the 2-hit KO. So it forces Goodra to have to come in. Hatterene comes in on the Goodra, which goes for an acid armor. Anistar trying something similar to how they tried to counter Team Big Bluff in week 1 of the season, but Humalao keen to their tricks. Sacks Hatterene to bring in Haxorus, which goes Terra Steel and immediately Dragon Dances. So it's immune to the Goodra Sludge Bomb. And an outrage from Haxorus at +1 is enough to OHKO the Goodra even at +2 defense. So Thunder's Therian has to come in, and it is Scarfed. Gets the pair with the Thunderbolt, but Haxorus has Lumberry. Of course it does. It's a DD Haxorus, for God's sake. Thunder's Therian goes down. Arcanine H is able to pick up the KO with the extreme speed, but Humalao now up in the sack war, and Barraskewda's got just enough HP to live the extreme speed from the Arcanine H before taking it out with an Aqua Jet. And so it's down to just Slowking G for Anistar. Conkeldurr comes in to allow Barraskewda to come back in at a later point and hit that liquidation. Conkeldurr, unfortunately full parry, so not able to get off any chip on the Slowking G, goes down to a Psychic Noise. Skewda comes in. Liquidation does 74, not enough to pick up the KO. Slowking G gets rid of Skewda with the Psychic Noise, but it's down to just G-King and Chansey. And because Slowking G doesn't have slack off in the back, Chansey's able to pick up the KO with a couple of seismic tosses, gives game 1 to Humalao. Game 2, turn 7, Chansey going for a seismic toss, and Fortress doesn't pick up the KO, so Fortress is able to rapid spin away the Stealth Rocks. Hatterene comes in, Fortress Volt switches out. Hatterene had already used the eject button, which means that Arcanine is able to pick up the KO with that head smash. Barraskewda's gonna have to come in. Fortress easily gets sacked here on the flip turn, already down to 2%. So Chansey comes in. That just means Arcanine H is able to come right back out. Pelipper gets the rain back up, but has to go down to a head smash. Barraskewda comes in, down 4-5. Goodra at 100%. Takes 39% from a flip turn, allows Haxorus to come right back in, so you know how this exchange is probably going to go. Haxorus goes straight for the DD, Goodra goes straight for the Acid Armor. Haxorus Terra Steals and DDs again. Goodra continues to stand its ground with another Acid Armor, which forces Haxorus to have to go for an Outrage to pick up the KO, which does get rid of Goodra, but the Primarina in the back is healthy, and so it blocks the Outrage. Haxorus cures its confusion, but Surf in the Rain is going to be able to easily one-shot the Haxorus. Barraskewda comes in, has to flip turn out, knowing that Liquidation is not going to pick up the KO. Conkeldurr is AV, so it lives one hit, but it's too slow to live a second. Primarina picks up the KO, and then a few turns later, Arcanine H gets in on Chansey. Does a lot of damage with that head smash. Gets parried, but it doesn't matter. Lands the second head smash, picks up the KO. And so Barraskewda is going to be able to pick up the KO on Arcanine H, but outside of the rain, it gets outsped by a Scarf Thunderous Therian. And so we move to game 3. Turn 10, Primarina forces Hatterene to eject out, but that just means Barraskewda is able to come in. We already know that Fortress is not a resist, and it doesn't help that Barraskewda gets the critical hit on the flip turn. So Caesar, the swap for Conkeldurr, comes in, picks up the KO with close combat. That's one deterrent to Barraskewda down. Thunder Syrian comes in to retaliate. Chansey comes in, U-turn into Arcanine H, which is gonna have to force another issue. So Pelipper is gonna come in ready to get sacked, but crucially Arcanine H misses the head smash, which means that Humalao gets to sack Hatterene instead of the Pelipper, so the Rain's gonna be able to stick around for a lot longer. Skewda comes in. Shaman comes in. Flip turn only does 23%, so Shaman's able to deal with this thing for a little bit, but Caesar comes in means that Shaman has to Terra Fairy. So while it is going to be able to take minimal damage from the Caesar U-turn, that just means Shaman is no longer a resist to Barraskewda, so the next deterrent is effectively out of the picture. Skewda flip turns out into Caesar, which gets leech seated, but Shaman can't live a bullet punch, so it has to go into Primarina. who takes 49% from a bullet point. So a second one takes out Primarina. The last deterrent to Barraskewda is effectively out of the picture. Chansey comes in on a Thunderbolt, gets paralyzed, but that's fine and dandy. You know, Chansey can eat these Thunderbolts up, but unfortunately gets full parried multiple turns in a row, and so Thunderous Therian picks up the KO, but that's just fine. Pelipper's gonna be able to come back in, set up the Ram, get sacked to the Thunderbolt, and like we said, all the deterrents for Barraskewda are out of the picture. Seaman comes in, no longer resists, gets KO'd by the Liquidation. Next mon up, Arcanine H, and we've already seen that at 84%, Extreme Speed's not going to pick up the KO, and so Skewda gets Arcanine out of the picture. Slowking G, we know that it's bulky, but it's not Fizz Def, so it's not going to be able to live the next Liquidation, so it's down to Thunderous Therian, which cannot outspeed in the rain, and so Humalau once again picks up a victory. Barraskewda 8 KOs this time, Haxor's 3 of its own. Humalau moves to 14-7, and Anastar, which at one point was at 5-6, now falls to 6-14 at death's doorstep, unable to pick up the upset win. The fate of the Sapphire League wildcard race would basically come down to Goldenrod and Littleroot in their rematch. You see that Glamora is the lead for Littleroot, wants to get up as many hazards as possible to enable their hyper offensive approach. Glamora goes down to a second Ceaseless Edge, but not before getting up 2 layers of T-Spike, Stealth Rocks, and a Mortal Spin Poison on Samrock H. Low Kicks comes in and immediately U-turns out. Diance's gonna have to come in, take all that chip all the way down to below 60%. Just for Tauros, Paldean, and Aqua to come in. You know that Bandit Wave Crash is gonna do a lot, and because Samurott H doesn't have boots or anything like that, it's got to take all that chip and goes down to the poison after a Wave Crash comes through. Indeedee Mail comes in right after to enable the Psychic Surge, and it's Scarf, but the Hyper Voice is not enough to pick up the KO, so Tauros, Paldean, Aqua is able to take another body before it goes down to the recoil. Talonflame U-turns out on Diancie, which was a good answer for Goldenrod. So Diancie gets up a good amount of chip with Diamond Storm on the Deoxys speed, but a Psycho Boost boosted by Terrain and a crit just for good measure is going to take out that Diancie. So Golurk is going to have to come in right after. Deoxys Speed has Protect, which is going to stall out the Terrain turns and deal a little bit more toxic chip to these opposing mons. But too greedy here, goes for a nasty plot, not respecting Golurk's Poltergeist, thinking that this thing might be choice locked. So Deoxys Speed goes down, Low Kicks comes in, and then Terra Ground from Golurk, which is actually an illegal Terra, but it does not get called out, so it results in Low Kicks going down, but Golurk goes down to the toxic chip as well. Veluza comes in, so does Armor Rouge. Bad answer here for Goldenrod. They have to pivot immediately into Iron Crown, which takes 57% from an Aqua Cutter. Volt Switch is out, but Veluza is able to live that, and the Citrus Berry is going to help them just for good measure. So now Armor Rouge has to get sacked to an Aqua Cutter, and it's down to Iron Crown, which isn't going to be able to do enough damage to the Veluza, certainly not with an unboosted Expanding Force. Littleroot takes game 1. Game 2. You gotta be shit.
Boy, it's out the mud. We got
ZU moment of the week.
What the fuck was that?
You're smoking dust.
It is the single most important set of your season, nay, your NWBA career. Let it be known, if Littleroot loses this set, they are eliminated from playoff contention outright. That's it. No second chances. And you make this kind of mistake in the middle of the set. Thank God that you were already up 1-0, because if this is how Littleroot gets eliminated from playoff contention, it would be the single biggest blunder in the history of the NWBA, maybe in the history of Draft League, total, in the entirety of Pokemon. It cannot be understated how absolutely boneheaded this is. I know it's ass o'clock for AZ right now, but you're already here. You're already playing the set. How could you possibly make a mistake like this? Brother, don't you understand? Your season is on the goddamn line, and you are going to absolutely throw it away because you can't look at the team builder for more than 3 seconds when you send the challenge? Are you that dense? Are you that goddamn insane? What the hell is wrong with you, boy? You need to wake up! Game 3, Glamora and Indeedee the leads. Goldenrod makes the adjustment, goes straight for the Psychic Force to pop the Focus Sash on Glamora, who goes straight for the Stealth Rocks and then switches into low kicks, expecting another expanding force. Goldenrod doesn't meet it with the right switch, goes an Iron Crown, and then a double from Littleroot into Glamora. Genius to get off the spike and the T-Spike on a Slitherwing Earthquake. Deoxys Speed comes right in, doubles back out into Tauros Paldean Aqua, expecting the switch, but instead Slitherwing just U-turns straight up. So Iron Crown comes in, but Tauros Paldean Aqua doesn't care. The CC gets the crit, takes down Iron Crown, forces Indeedee to come out to try to get the revenge KO. Because Tauros is at -1, Hyper Voice is able to pick up the KO this time around. So Littleroot goes into Veluza. Hyper Voice only doing 54%, figures that it's time to go for the win with the fillet away, but a Veluza at +2 speed is not actually enough to outspeed the Indeedee, and so Goldenrod opens up a big lead here in Game 3. Armarouge comes in on the Talonflame, U-turns out, procs the weak armor, Deoxys Speed, now gonna have to take the full force of Armarouge's attacks, goes straight for the Protect, goes for that extra poison chip just for the sake of it. Armor Cannon does a lot, but does not crucially pick up the KO. Deoxys Speed KOs with the Dark Pulse to make it 3-4. Samurai H comes in. You know this thing is gonna be able to take out Deoxys Speed, Protect on the next turn to block the Ceaseless Edge. So, Littleroot, trying to think of what to do, goes into low kicks on the knockoff. Crucially, was not a water move from Goldenrod. That could be a bit of a mistake. So they have to go into Slitherwing, which takes 45% from a knockoff, gets rid of those heavy duty boots, and now Slitherwing's gonna have to take some punishment on the way in, but takes punishment on the way out, gets burnt by the flame body on Talonflame, so functionally it's 3-3. Golart comes in, a tactical roost comes out from Littleroot, so that Stone Edge does not get the one-hit KO, and then another genius move on the next turn, goes for the overheat. Goldenrod tries to read the next roost, goes for Earthquake, and so Talonflame does more than enough chip to take out the Golurk thanks to that poison damage, even though it goes down to a Stone Edge. So it's 2-3, but remember there's a burnt Slitherwing, all the boots are off the field, things are taking so much chip. Slitherwing has to double out into Samurai H. Deoxys Speed goes straight for the Protect to block the potential first impression. Samurai H has 2 turns to try to make something shake. Aqua Jet gets blocked by Protect, and then just for good measure, Littleroot gets the second Protect off. Samurai H goes down to the Poison Chip, and so it's up to Indeedee to get the KO on Deoxys Speed, which it won't be able to do because Dio Speed is still faster. And so after all of that, after all of the work, after the big misstep in Game 2, Littleroot still finds a way. Gamora's numbers, absolutely impressive. Dio Speed putting in big work. And for the team that started 0-10 to start the season, they finish 9-13 and give themselves the best possible chance to make the playoffs. Rose Tower once again starts off the week with a win, a 2-0 victory over Kitakami to keep their hopes of the Ruby Ribbon alive. Latios 13 points as it makes its final case for Ruby League MVP. Littleroot continues to survive a 2-0 victory over the top team in the Sapphire League behind the Titans, 18 points, locking Spear Pillar out of a coveted and rare 20-win season. Kimura would get their vengeance on Mauville in a 2-0 victory. Basque Legion female 16 points. The Rain offense cooking despite the Barraskewda ban as Kimura looks to roll into the playoffs with all the momentum on their side. Sky Pillar solidifies a top 3 seed in the Ruby League with a grinded out victory over Big Bluff Heatran, 18 points in the dub. Howley keeps their playoff hopes alive by stifling Koroway in a 2-0 victory over Koryo Sensu, 12 points, and a cavalcade of team building oddities ends up working. Another victory for Littleroot in a 2-0 win over Big Bluff Veluza, 14 points to get the sweep, could still potentially make the playoffs after all. Hearthome would go down 2-0 in a battle that they desperately needed. Koroway clinches a playoff berth behind an Amorous Eyes 15-point performance. Hearthome would pick up a big victory over Howley, eliminating them from playoff contention in a 2-0 victory. Mew finally gets a chance to shine with 10 points. In a battle between the top 2 teams in the league, Lavender Town proves to be the better and luckier. Hippowdon 12 points in the potential finals preview. And finally, for the regular season finale, Howley and Kitakami, both eliminated from playoff contention, puts together a performance for the fans. Tyranitar 8 points in the Metronome Ditto battle victory. All right, after 6 weeks of league coverage, we can finally take a look and find out who the 10 teams will be playing in the Season 8 playoffs. There's been many twists and turns along the way. Would any of our dark horse contenders actually pull off the unthinkable and make their way to the big dance? For all the drama that we were prepared to deal with following week 4, the final edition of the Ruby League standings actually looks very similar to how it had compared to last week. Lavender Town does in fact hold on to the top spot to win the Ruby League ribbon. That is the 3rd ribbon of Nico's career, but it did not come without a little bit of controversy. As you can see, both Lavender Town and Rose Tower went undefeated in week 6, but not perfect. Both teams went 3-0-1 because they agreed to a draw against each other. This is a very fascinating, interesting decision when you consider that Rose Tower had actually beaten Lavender Town in their first matchup. If Rose Tower had managed to win the run back, they would have been the 1 seed as opposed to the 2. So it's very weird to see them agree to that draw, but for what it's worth, they did so. Whether that is a matter of wanting to play Sky Pillar as opposed to the wildcard winner, or whether or not the Kaparajas really didn't care, we will never know for certain, but it is interesting to point out that caveat. Sky Pillar did in fact hold on to the 3 seed, went 3-1 on the week, and as a result, they very easily cruised to avoiding that wildcard round. The 2 teams that we will see in the wildcard round includes Koroway, who went 3-1 in the final week of the season to finish at exactly 500, so that is a very good performance from the workers. And that last wildcard spot ended up going to Big Bluff after all. They were the 5 seed coming into the week. That being said, they did damn near everything in their power to lose that spot. They went 1-3 on the week, their 1 win coming against Mount Steel. And we knew coming into the week that if Big Bluff didn't have a great week, there was a good chance that they would end up losing that playoff spot. And yet, despite everything, they did not have a great week, but still ended up winning that last playoff spot regardless. Howley was actually the team that moved up in the standings up to 6. They finished at 7-15, went 3-1 in their final week, and if they had managed to beat Hearthome, they would have gotten that final wildcard spot. So the Bishops better thank the Heaters for doing their dirty work for them, because otherwise we would have been talking about Keg leading yet another late season turnaround to sneak into the playoffs. Anastar ends up as the 7th team, 6-16 record. Once again went winless, which means the Diamond Storm went 1-10 in the back half of the season. Absolutely brutal. Not for lack of effort. It's not as if Flair just disappeared, but regardless, a rough stretch is a rough stretch, and that is as rough as it can get, short of literally losing every single set. But for what it's worth, they didn't finish dead last in the Ruby League. That dishonor goes to Kitakami, who unfortunately finishes at 5-17, did not win a single game in the final 2 weeks of the season. That is how your season disappears. Who's to say how much of that was a matter of the roster overhaul that Kitakami underwent, but at the end of the day, just couldn't find a way to capitalize off their good start to the season. For what it's worth, and to the credit of the Kyodai, 5-17 ended up being the single worst record in Season 8, but it is comfortably the best win-loss record by any team that ended up finishing dead last in the entire league. So, credit to Kitakami, despite finishing with the worst record in the league, they were just as competitive as everybody else. As for the Sapphire League, we knew that the top of the standings would have a little bit less intrigue, given that Spear Pillar had a big lead on Mauville for that Sapphire Ribbon spot. And as a matter of fact, Spear Pillar did in fact clinch the Sapphire League ribbon. It did not come without some turmoil though, going just 1-3 in their final week, including losing to Mauville for the second time this season. So that is something to look at heading into the playoffs. Speaking of Mauville, they were in fact the number 2 team in the Sapphire League, finishing with a record of 15-6-1. Even with the win against Spear Pillar, didn't have a fantastic week 6, just went 2-2, but getting into the playoffs was all that mattered, and seeing as how they are already clinched a playoff spot, exactly where they finished in the standings didn't truly matter, especially given how unlikely they were to move into the number 1 spot. Himalayo, of course, retained their number 3 status, finishing with a record of 15-7 and going a perfect 4-0 on week 6. So that is a team rolling right into the playoffs with quite a lot of momentum. As for the Sapphire Wild Card race, 3 separate teams finished 9-13, meaning that we had to go down to tiebreakers to determine which of the 2 would be making the playoffs as the wild card and which unfortunate team would be going home. The first wild card team would in fact be the Goldenrod Shiny Leafs. This is despite them going 1-3 over the final week of the season. Granted, we knew that Goldenrod would have a tough schedule ahead of them, but their one victory over Mount Steel ended up being the most crucial aspect of them making the playoffs. But have to say, barely by the skin of their teeth does Goldenrod advance. The final wild card spot would in fact be the Little Root Time Zone Bandits. So congratulations to AZ and company for orchestrating one of the greatest regular season turnarounds in NWBA history. This was a team that was 1-10 in the first half of the season. In fact, starting 0-10, which was an NWBA record for most sets to start a season without a win. And yet, all that mattered is getting into the playoffs. Somehow, someway, the Time Zone Bandits put together as many wins as they could, which ended up being quite a lot in the back half of the season. And off of the back of a perfect Week 6, 4-0, they are the final playoff team in the Sapphire League, which means that the odd man out in this situation is, in fact, Heart Home. Unfortunately, went 2-2, did a decent job in Week 6, but decent just was not enough to sneak into the playoffs. As you look at the details of these 3 teams, what's important to note is that the first tiebreaker, being head-to-head matchups, did not result in an even split because Goldenrod and Heart Home had actually split their regular season series. So despite the fact that Heart Home had swept Little Root, who had swept Goldenrod, because Goldenrod and Heart Home went 1-1, we had to move on to different tiebreakers. The first one being game count, which Goldenrod was able to make it in as the first team by virtue of having a better overall game count winning percentage. And as you can see, Little Root and Heart Home had the exact same game count. So as a result, we had to go down to win differential, the first time in NWBA history that we have had to go that deep into the weeds to determine a wild card team. But as a result of Little Root being just a little bit more dominant than Heart Home, even with a negative win differential, they end up as the final wild card team. Mount Steel once again pulled a no-show to finish 7-15. did get a single victory by virtue of Castelia City forfeiting before Mount Steel's no-show could be put into the books. But for what it's worth, Mount Steel effectively went winless over the entire back half of the season. This was a team that at one point was 6-3. Very unfortunate to see. Hopefully what's going on with Reign behind the scenes isn't anything too important, but what we can say is that that is a team that completely threw their season in the garbage. Castelia City, by virtue of forfeiting their final week, ended up finishing 5-16-1, which was the worst team in the Sapphire League. But again, for being the worst team in a league, 5-16-1 is not at all a bad record, especially not for a newcomer to the format, let alone the NWBA. So hats off to Ubel for a solid debut, but unfortunately just wasn't solid enough to sneak into the playoffs. The final edition of the Power Rankings for Season 8 once again sees quite a lot of movement. Lavender Town moves up one spot, back to the top spot on the Power Rankings. Once again, favorites. This is Nico's third time being the #1 seed in the league that he has played in. He has been no worse than the 3 seed in his 4 seasons as an NWBA GM. So the Pranksters have what it takes to finally deliver him his championship. We'll just have to see if it goes down that way. Rose Tower also moves up one spot to #2. Changes could carry. This is a team that underwent a ton of roster overhaul at multiple points during the season. And because of the changes that they made in the final week of free agency, it means that neither of the top 2 contenders in the Ruby League have seen this version of the Crop Raja. So does that mean that Rose Tower has the element of surprise we'll have to see in the playoffs properly? But that is a very interesting dimension to look out for Rose Tower in the postseason. Spirit Pillar drops down 2 spots to #3, and the question has to be asked, hiccups or cracks? Seems a bit unfair to be questioning the top seed in the Sapphire League, but 1-3 is not how you want to enter the playoffs. We did see that last season, Amber Town didn't really have the greatest entry into the playoffs and ended up losing their first match. Not to say that Spirit Pillar is going to do the same, but it is fair to question. Losing 3 sets to 3 teams that are in the playoffs does raise a little bit of cause for concern. Mauville retains their spot at #4. Offense can outperform. We've seen it happen all season. This is one of the best teams in the league. The record shows that. It's just a matter of if Mauville can keep their feet on the gas pedal and do what they've done to get them all those wins in the regular season in the playoffs. Himalaya moves up 1 spot to finish in the top 5. Repeat recipes ready. We already know that Himalaya can win a championship. They did it last season. But in beating Mauville and Sky Pillar in the final week of the season shows that this team is pretty much already in playoff form. Don't be surprised if the swim team once again make another run to the finals, if not actually repeat a championship victory. Sky Pillar drops down 1 spot to #6. Question is, will defense survive? Again, much like Spirit Pillar, it's kind of unfair to be questioning a team that was 6-5 in the first half and finished with a 15-7 record. But the question still does need to be asked about Sky Pillar, simply because we've seen that balanced approaches haven't really worked super well all season. And while Sky Pillar has been the exception to the rule up to this point, we're in the playoffs now. Can they really get by playing the war of attrition game, or will they have to tap into that firepower to win in the playoffs? Or maybe not even win in the playoffs at all. Corway moves up 1 spot to #7. Team building will decide. This team's fate has hinged on Z's ability to build the right moveset all season. Ended up being the reason they made the playoffs in the back half of the season. Can he keep that up and give this team a real shot at winning a championship? For what it's worth, we've seen wildcard teams make it to the championship and win in seasons past. Literal was the biggest mover this week, moving up 5 whole spots to #8. All that momentum that they have been riding has carried them into the top half of the final edition of the Power Rankings. anything is possible with this team. This was a team that was extremely easy to write off in the first half. Again, bears repeating, they were 1-10 after week 3. So for them to go all the way to 9-13 and make it into the playoffs means that this is one of the most dangerous teams heading into the playoffs. And we all know what happens when teams get momentum rolling into the playoffs in any form of competition. Goldenrod drops down 2 spots to number 9. Gotta adapt fast. This is a team that has, by and large, kind of limped into the postseason. If the Shiny Leafs want to actually contend for a championship, they're gonna have to make big changes, and they're gonna have to make them very fast. That wildcard game leaves no room for error. Goldenrod has to tighten up. Heartgold, despite missing the playoffs, remains at spot number 10. Just too unfortunate. Heaters have been unlucky, you could say, all season, and as it turns up, just did not have enough things swing their way to end up making the postseason. So unfortunate for Heartgold, but we know this team will be back. Big Bluff, despite making the playoffs, drops down 2 spots to number 11. This team has to play to their strengths. That is the key for this team. Big Bluff has a strong Sun offense. They have some other firepower in mons like Azumarill as well. They have to play to what they know how to do and what they know how to do best. Comfortability is a very underrated aspect of the playoffs. Big Bluff has to tap into that. Howley moves up 4 spots to number 12. Another big riser. Had players shook though. Just gotta say it. Howley came into the week the worst team in the Ruby League as far as record shows, and yet almost snuck into the postseason. Again, if not for that loss to Heartgold, they would have made the playoffs. So, gotta tip your hat to Keg once again. Anastar and Mount Steel both dropped 2 spots to spots 13 and 14. For Anastar, too many stumbles. Just couldn't capitalize on the opportunities they had in the back half of the season. This was not a awful team, but 1-10 in the back half of the season does have to say something about this team's performance. For Mount Steel, burnout consumes all. At least that's what we think happened. Terrain, it's hard to say for certain. We don't really know for sure. We've gotten word from the commissioner that the work vortex might have taken her. Only she knows for certain. What we do know is that Mount Steel was in a very good position to make the playoffs after just 2 weeks in the regular season, and here they are sitting in the bottom 3 of the final power rankings. Kid Economy drops down 1 spot to number 15, and again, a question needs to be asked. Was the overhaul unnecessary? This was a team that was doing okay when they were leaning in on the electric terrain. Obviously, a lot of people clowned on Kid Economy for it, but the results early were fairly promising. All of those roster changes pivoting to going all in on electric terrain that never really manifested, and then pivoting to a Sun team didn't really result in anything that Kid Economy actually wanted to accomplish. So the question has to be asked, was the overhaul actually the death knell for this team? And then moving down to the last spot in the power rankings, you've got Castelia City. And not to be too much of a downer, gotta say, solid for a newcomer. Ubo came into this not really familiar with the singles format, even less familiar with the NWBA's very weird format. So to still be competitive heading into the last week of the season is still very impressive for a new player. So hats off to Ubo. And again, hats off to all our competitors for making this the most competitive season in NWBA yet. Week 6 is usually a week where the numbers end up trending downward, at the very least in weird directions, given that a lot of players end up not playing as many sets as they normally would over the course of a full week. That being said, we still have some pretty solid numbers across the board. Barraskewed of Himalaya and Setitan of Litterroot actually tied atop the leaderboard both in KOs and points, 14 and 28 respectively. But for the sake of the show, alphabetical order takes precedent above all, which is why Barraskewda appears at the very top. Arcanine H of Anastar comes in tied with third with 12 KOs, as does Reuniclus of Mauville with 12 KOs each. And then Superior of Spear Pillar coming in 5th with 10 KOs. Lamora of Littleroot puts up 12 assists to make it the assist leader in week 6. Tansy of Himalao and Yuxi of Koroway both putting up 11 assists. Lycanroc Dusk, of course, once again back with 10 assists, good for 4th place this week. And then Torkoal of Big Bluff putting up 7. We already talked about the 2 points leaders, but there was a 3-way tie for 3rd place, including Heatran of Sky Pillar, the aforementioned Reuniclus, and the aforementioned Superior, all with 18. As far as points per game and kills per game, Oricorio Pao of Lavender Town reigns at the top. Only had 1 game on record technically, but got all 6 KOs in that game without dying. So, as it stands, 6 KOs per game, 12 points per game, pretty good week for Oricorio Pao. Basket Legion of Humalao finished 2nd in both categories with 8 points per game and 4 KOs per game. However, that KO per game comes with the tie with Enamorous Eye of Koroway, who also put up 4. Enamorous Eye also came in 3rd in points per game with 7.5. Satitan would finish in 4th in both categories with 7 points per game and 3.5 KOs per game, while Latios of Rose Tower came in 5th with 6.5 points per game, and then tied to Titan in KOs per game, also with 3.5. The final edition of the MVP ladder sees a lot of movement again, but more so in the Sapphire League. The top 3 in the Ruby League remain in their spots. Latios still considered the frontrunner for Ruby League MVP. As a matter of fact, it actually made a better case than either Meloetta or Azulf in the final week of the season. Latios sits number 1 in KOs, points, and usage rate in the entire Ruby League. So it actually has a little bit more of a cushion on its running mates and is likely to finish the Ruby League MVP in Season 8. Meloetta still sits at number 2, 2nd in KOs, tied for 2nd in points, and 4th in usage rate in the Ruby League, while Azulf right behind it, 3rd in KOs, tied with Meloetta for 2nd in points, and 7th overall in usage rate in the Ruby League. Again, neither Meloetta nor Azulf had a really anything week in week 6, which is why Latios is now considered to be the true favorite. Azumarill and Hippowdon are new entries to the MVP ladder after week 6. Azumarill ranks top 5 in the Ruby League both in KOs and in usage rate and still finishes the top 15 in points. It ended up overtaking Walking Wake as the de facto most important Mon as far as the metrics were concerned. Granted, you could say that Walking Wake and Azumarill had an equal hand in Big Bluff's playoff appearance, but for the sake of the MVP ladder, this is really a 3-team race. And then Hippowdon sneaking in as a result of being number 1 in assists in the Ruby League, number 4 in points, and top 10 in usage rate, as well as being the only Mon in the Ruby League that made the 2020 club this season. Again, the issue with Lavender Town was that they had so many great Mons that they all kind of cannibalized votes and positioning away from each other, and it just so happened that Hippowdon was the one to rule above them all as far as the ladder is concerned. In the Sapphire League, Lycanroc Dusk overtakes the top spot from Jolteon. Top 10 in KOs in the Sapphire League, number 1 in assists and points, and number 2 in usage rate. Just by virtue of not even Jolteon having a bad week, but one of its teammates having a fantastic week, means that Lycanroc is still considered to be a little bit more valuable to its team than Jolteon was by virtue of Barraskewda entering the ladder, as we will get into in a little bit. Jolteon, for what it's worth, still has a great case, tied first in KOs in the Sapphire League, number 2 overall in points, and number 3 overall in usage rate in the league. Infernape is the first new entry we talk about in the Sapphire League, jumping up to the number 3 spot in the Sapphire League MVP ladder, tied first in KOs, 4th in points, and number 1 in usage rate in the Sapphire League. What hurts Infernape's argument is not only the fact that it had a very late season push, but also the fact that Heart-Home missed the playoffs entirely. It would be unprecedented for the MVP to go to a team that did not make the playoffs in the Gen 9 era. This did happen all the way back in the very first season of the NWBA, but that is a bygone era. It would be insane for it to happen in today's climate, or would it? Barraskewda, as we mentioned, is another new entry to the MVP ladder, slotting it at number 4, and by proxy, hurting Jolteon's chances. Tied for 4th in KOs, number 3 in points, and number 9 in usage rate. Barraskewda had one of the best weeks in week 6, was a contender for Pokemon of the Week, and as a result, makes Jolteon's case a little bit harder to justify. Granted, by this point, the ballots will have already been cast and voted on, but it's still worth mentioning nonetheless. Tornadius Therian drops down to spot number 5, still number 3 in KOs and number 5 in points in the Sapphire League, but by virtue of its teammates having, again, pretty strong performances, but also just overall, Sphere Pillar's lackluster week 6 means that Tornadius Therian couldn't really create any space for itself to really be a true MVP candidate by the end of the season. It was far from a banner week for the Ruby League in week 6, which means that Heatran of Sky Pillar ends up winning its 2nd award this season. 9 KOs was 2nd in the Ruby League, 18 points was tied for 3rd in the entire NWBA, while its 6 points per game and 3 KOs per game were both 3rd in the Ruby League. Heatran, as a matter of fact, only played 1 set against Big Buff, but was so dominant in that single set that it still ended up winning the Pokemon Week Award for the Ruby League. So hats off to a Gen 8 Hall of Famer, still capable of putting belt to ass, even if it's only for 1 set a week. For the Sapphire League Pokemon of the Week, a familiar face, the one we have not seen yet this season, Titan of the Littleroot Time Zone Bandits. 14 KOs and 28 points were both tied for first in the NWBA this week. Its 7.0 points per game and 3.5 KOs per game were both 2nd in the Sapphire League. Titan had the exact same amount of KOs and points as Barraskewda of Humalao, but in doing it in fewer games, it has a more efficient set of stats and therefore ends up winning Pokemon of the Week. The most dominant Pokemon in NWBA history over the course of a single season is still, in fact, good enough to win Pokemon of the Week in another dominant performance, even in a different season. Who could have possibly guessed it? Big reason why Littleroot was able to sneak into the playoffs. So hats off to Titan and hats off to the Time Zone Bandits for getting it done.
Boy, it's out the mud. We got
ZU moment of the week.
What the fuck was that?
You're smoking dust.
Yes, we are in fact double dipping a little bit here for ZU moment of the week. We covered Goldenrod and Littleroot earlier in this episode, but that wasn't supposed to be our actual ZU moment of the week. Our legitimate ZU moment of the week was supposed to be between Goldenrod and Lavender Town. If you take a look at the sheet here, you'll see that Slitherwing is not supposed to be in this set. This was Lavender Town's band heading into this set. And yet, there the moth is, staring Nico dead in the damn face. This didn't really result in anything game 1 because Lavender Town kind of just put belt to ass. So we moved to game 2, and eventually Nico catches on to what's actually going on here. Yeah, bring a band mod to a set has happened before. It isn't quite as egregious as the incident between Cicely and Kitakami back in season 6, but it is very notable that our own goddamn commissioner can't even follow the rules all the time. We get it, people are busy. Dom's been in work hell all week, but the rules are the rules. Even Adam Silver himself isn't exempt to these things, and for this to come during a stretch of the season where Goldenrod needs every single win they could get to try to get into the playoffs, it makes it look all the more egregious. So yeah, there's your fuel for the end of the season. Go ahead and point and laugh at your commissioner for being just as foolish as anybody that's made a damn mistake in this league. Now, typically it doesn't get too much love from us here at Wonder Room, but the start of the playoffs also means one important thing in particular. All-Star Night. While historically, we haven't really covered All-Star Night on the show. We thought it would be a good idea this season to talk about what mons you could potentially see in action tonight in our All-Star game. Now, of course, better teams typically have more representatives, but because the All-Star vote is a community effort, you often see a lot of surprises. So there are going to be some mons featured in this next segment that may not necessarily have put together the greatest impact on the season, but by virtue of being the most impactful mon for a team, whether they are good or bad, that's gonna qualify them to be pretty high up in the All-Star voting. So let's play a little bit of speculation, have a little bit of fun tonight, shall we? Now, as we get into looking at the potential All-Stars in each league, it's important to note a few things. Number one, All-Star voting is a community effort. So what the people decide is what ends up representing the All-Stars. So if everyone colluded together and put together the worst mons on each roster and sent them to the All-Star game, well, that's what the ballots say. So you have to keep in mind that while there are going to be some mons that have scored very highly, have a high amount of KOs and points, they might not necessarily make the All-Star game just because they didn't get enough votes, whether that was because people forgot or narrative posting or whatever reason. Number two is that trends in community voting typically say that every team is likely to have at least one All-Star, if not multiple, if possible. So while there are some teams that did very poorly in the regular season, they are likely to still have at least one mon representing them in the All-Star game. And again, for what it's worth, the most likely All-Stars are the ones that end up scoring the most points because they are the most visible, but that does not necessarily mean that those are the most likely vote getters. So just because a mon isn't featured in this next upcoming segment does not mean they are not going to make the All-Star game. It just means that they weren't likely to do so. For us, there were three likely candidates: Masquerada, Dragapult, and Latios. Latios, of course, one of the MVP favorites, if not the MVP frontrunner outright. Dragapult was very high on the ladder. Masquerada was not too far behind as well. All three of them have been very good offensively, and they've been threats since day one. Kitakami and Haoli are in very similar situations. Neither team was particularly great over the course of the season, but again, it's very unlikely for a team to have no All-Stars. And in both of their cases, they have some mons that have been around the block long enough, showed their face enough that they could end up making it in. Ogerpon Cornerstone does not have great numbers, but was a ban sponge for this team. And we have seen in seasons past, mons that don't put up great numbers but do get banned a lot still get voted to the All-Star game just because of their potential threat. Serena and Tyranitar have very similar cases where they've played a lot of games for these factions, and as a result are kind of the face of the team, so it wouldn't be surprised to see them get votes just off of familiarity. Ice Cube is a very interesting one for how Oli, while it was only on the roster when Keg was the active GM, it did well enough in those 3 weeks that it would not be surprised to see momentum go its way and actually get voted in the All-Star game, despite not really having the numbers that says that it had full season success, which it didn't. Anastar's dynamic duo of Thunderous Therian and Arcanon H both put up good points, so it's likely that one, if not both of them, end up representing Anastar in the All-Star game. Big Bluff has three mons that are somewhat likely to end up making it. Walking Wake and Azumarill both fairly high on the MVP ladder. Walking Wake was in top 5 at one point. Azumarill finished top 5. And while Venusaur doesn't really have the numbers that the other two have, their numbers are still good enough that you could see Venusaur potentially make the All-Star game if the voting goes one way or another. Lavender Town has actually more than 4 mons that could make the All-Star game, but we haven't seen a team put more than 4 mons in the All-Star game before, so we narrowed it down to their 4 most likely. Kirim, Necrozma, and Oricorio Pal all serve similar purposes in being very good offensive threats and putting up a ton of numbers for Lavender Town, while Hippowdon doesn't exactly have the KOs, but it does have the points. In fact, they were Lavender Town's point leader by the conclusion of the season. And once again, getting into the 2020 club, not always something that people consider, but if there is a defensive bond that is likely to make the All-Star game this season, it's going to be one of the best in the Gen 9 era. Sky Pillar has 3 mons that could make it in as well. Heatran and Iron Hands, while not the most standout, have been very steady all season, while Azelf is one of those 3 mons that are vying for the Ruby League MVP, so Not to say that Azelf is a lock. We have seen MVP candidates miss the All-Star game before. It hasn't happened in a long time, and we like to think it wouldn't happen this season. Koroway similarly has Garchomp and Amorous Eye. Again, not the craziest numbers in the world, but both very solid. They've been very threatening. Both of them have been banned quite a ton as well, so they are very much candidates. And then you've got Meloetta, which, similar to Azelf, an MVP favorite, one of the 3 Mons likely to win MVP, that 3-headed race between Azelf, Latios, and Meloetta, and has all the numbers to support being one of the most impactful Mons all season. So much like Azelf and Latios, it would be an absolute robbery if this Mon didn't make the All-Star game. Moving on over to the potential list of Sapphire League Mons that could make the All-Star game, Leaderboard has 4 Mons that we think could make it. It's extremely rare to see a team with a losing record put together more than 2 Mons, but for what it's worth, Littleroot's offense is almost entirely focused on 4 Mons, and so all 4 of these Mons have a lot of points and KOs and could make the team. Deoxys Speed, Sit Titan, Tauros Paldean Aqua, and Veluza all potentially could make it. In particular, Tauros Paldean Aqua and Veluza were extremely good in the back half of the season, so they have a little bit more of a fresh impression on voters' minds. For Hearthome, Yanmega and Infernape basically did all the work for them. Infernape in particular was extremely good in the back half of the season, so wouldn't be surprised to see either, if not both of them, make it in. Spirit Pillar, by virtue of being the best team in Sapphire League, also has 4 Mons that could potentially make it. The 3-headed monster of Tornadus Theory and Great Tusk and Darkrai have been very good all season, cannibalizing MVP votes most likely off of each other. But there's also the Jirachi in the back, which did not play a whole lot of games, but when it did hit the field, it was absolutely demonic to deal with, very similar to Necrozma of Lavender Town. Goldenrod has 3 Mons, Slitherwing, Diancie, and Raikou that could make it. Raikou has by far the best shot. Slitherwing and Diancie didn't really have the points to make up for it. And for what's worth, Diancie did pretty much all their damage for Rose Tower in the first half of the season, but was so good in the first half of the season that there's a possibility that it could still end up making it after all. Humalao, by virtue of them changing their roster so much, kind of hurts their chances of putting more than 2 in the All-Star game. But if there is a duo that is a lock, as close to a lock as you can get at least, it would be Barraskewda and Jolteon, 2 Mons that could walk away with the MVP trophy at the end of the day. Jolteon, of course, having been an MVP candidate as early as week 3, but Barraskewda in particular really bookending the season, was very strong at the beginning and was very strong at the end. Could see that Mon very much in the All-Star game as well. Mount Steel, despite basically disappearing over the last 2 weeks of the season, hell, even the back half of the season, still has 2 Mons that very well could threaten to get into the All-Star game, Latios and Weavile. Weavile, again, a Mon that doesn't really have great numbers, but again, people like to vote for at least 1 Mon on each team, and by virtue of there being 16 votes for everyone this season, 2 Mons per team is probably going to be a legitimate voting strategy for a lot of people. Latios is a little bit easier to defend. As a matter of fact, this Mon was on the MVP ladder following week 4 and looked like it was actually going to be the front runner for MVP after 3 weeks. So if anyone on this team is going to make it, Latios would be a very great answer to that query. Marvel has a lot of Mons that have points spread out between themselves, but there are 3 in particular on this team. Iron Valiant and Lycanroc Dusk, obviously 2 of the most respected and feared Mons in the league. Iron Valiant put together its best season even with how many bans it sustained, while Lycanroc Dusk, the very much possible threat to being the only Mon to ever make the 40-40 club, didn't actually get there, but is the second ever Mon to make it to the 30-30 club. This Mon could end up winning MVP, would be, in our honest opinion, the most likely Mon to get locked into the All-Star game. And then Reuniclus, as a low-tiered Terra Sweeper, you know how that goes, put up more than enough points to justify making the All-Star game. And then lastly, you've got Castelia City, which pretty much had the least amount of points of anyone as far as their points leaders. And yet again, because we know that there are going to be at least 1 Mon that gets heavy consideration, Entei is the most likely Mon of the team to make the game, but Toxapex, by virtue of being one of the most annoying mons to ever do it, even if the points aren't all there, wouldn't be too big of a surprise. It's gotten mighty close before, and we have seen defensive Pokemon make the All-Star game in seasons past, like Wochen in Season 6 and Umbreon in Season 7. So if there's ever a mon to do it, probably be Toxapex. Alright, let's move into today's final segment. Look at the playoff bracket, what we can come to expect as we reach the end of the season, and put together a picture of who's got the best chance of raising that coveted championship by the end. So, as we take a look at the playoff bracket for Season 8, we start with the wildcard matchups. In the Ruby League, Koroway gets to take on Big Bluff. They first met on opening night, where Big Bluff won in 3 games, while Koroway won the run back in straight games in Week 4. Of course, Week 4 was quite a long time ago, so the fact that they are meeting here in what is effectively Week 7 means that it feels like a brand new matchup. Could go either way. As far as the Sapphire League, Goldenrod and Littleroot once again, Littleroot having swept the season series, winning 2-1 in both matchups coming in Weeks 3 and 6. So Littleroot does have the head-to-head advantage, but you have to remember the rule of 3s. It's hard to beat the same team 3 times. And while it's easier to do so when it's a best of 1, no bans, this is the NWBA. You can't rule out anything. As far as our semis matchups that are set in stone, which is effectively league quarters. In the Ruby League, you've got Rose Tower and Sky Pillar. Sky Pillar having swept the regular season series 2-0 in Week 1 and then 2-1 in Week 4. But again, Week 4 was quite a long time ago, and Rose Tower has completely rechanged their roster, so this is effectively a toss-up matchup. Regular season sets are going to go out the window for this one. On the Sapphire side, Mauville versus Humalau. Mauville won their first matchup 2-0 in Week 3, but Humalau turned it right around and won 2-0 in Week 6. So that is a very recent matchup that Humalau got the better of Mauville in. We'll see what changes Mauville tries to make to beat them in the rubber match. The 2 1 seeds, of course, being Lavender Town and Spear Pillar, means that they get to play the winner of the wild card matchups. In Lavender Town's case, they are 4-0 total against the wild card teams, having beaten Koroway in straight games in Weeks 1 and 4, having beaten Big Bluff in straight games in Week 6, and then, of course, Big Bluff forfeited in Week 3. But regardless, Lavender Town has not dropped a single game against either team. Spear Pillar's situation is a little different. While they have swept Goldenrod in the regular season, it was 2-0 in their first matchup in Week 2 and then 2-1 in their second matchup in Week 5. As far as their matchup against Littleroot, they 2-0'd them in Week 3 but got 2-0'd right back in Week 6. So Spear Pillar might be pulling for Goldenrod a little bit more in this matchup. Either way, both those wildcard teams had a better performance against Spear Pillar in their runbacks. And then, of course, we can't really project our potential matchups in the Ruby Finals, Sapphire Finals, or even the NWBA Finals, because we actually have to play the playoff sets to get there. But if you were to ask us who we think is going to be in the championship, it's kind of hard to pick against Humalau on the Sapphire side. They've got all the momentum rolling. Kobe's the defending champ. We've seen him do this before. Kind of have to ride the hot hand here. As far as the Ruby League, Rose Tower is the hot hand, and you do kind of have to wonder why it was that Lavender Town and Rose Tower didn't actually play in the regular season in Week 6 to determine that 1 seed. It could be that they were saving their secrets for their potential playoff matchup, but if they don't actually play in the playoffs, was it all for naught? Regardless, with the changes that Rose Tower has made, and based on the fact that the rule of 3s is always prevalent at least 50% of the time in the NWBA, and the fact that they beat Lavender Town the first time they played, Lavender Town wasn't interested in playing them in the regular season, we'd like to think they're actually the favorite to emerge in the Ruby League. Maybe not necessarily the favorite, but at the very least, the team you have to watch out for the most. So, if you're asking what the official Wonder Room prediction is for the NWBA Finals, it would be the 2 seed Rose Tower Copperajahs versus the 3 seed Humalau Swim Team. Regardless, Shaping up to be an extremely interesting postseason. The top 6 teams have been the top 6 teams all season, so would not be surprised to see any combination of those 6 make it to the big dance. But wildcard teams always have something under the hood. It would not be too surprising to see Coralway, or especially Littleroot, find a way to make it all the way to the NWBA finals. All right, friends, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for watching. I've been your host, King Vasser. Coming up next, All-Star Night. Of course, we got the Ruby League and Sapphire League All-Stars in a 1-to-5, but we've also reportedly got some exhibitions, which does never happen on All-Star Night, so it should be a very fun night. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you soon.